Are you ready to replace the wasteful concept of the funnel with the more contemporary and effective process of value learning? Can you identify the high-learning customers and prospects who give you an advantage? Let's listen to Mark Packard on the latest research and the newest and most effective tools for learning from your customers.
This is the Economics for Entrepreneurs podcast, a project of the Mises Institute, applying the principles of economics to start, grow, and manage your business. For free tools, resources, key takeaways, and actionable insights from each episode, visit Mises.org/E4EPod. Now, here's Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Our mission at Economics for Entrepreneurs includes bringing you insights and methods that you can use to grow and strengthen your business, and some tools to apply those insights and put them into action. A few weeks ago, in episode 44 in December 2019, we hosted Professor Mark Packard of the University of Nevada in Reno, and Mark walked us through a set of novel insights based on a lot of original research about how firms can help customers through the satisfaction loop of anticipating value from a product or service, experiencing that value, and assessing the value experience so as to decide whether or not to repeat it. Mark calls this the value learning process. Part of the big breakthrough in this thinking is seeing value as a process, and specifically a learning loop process, and not an economic calculation. We published a process map via the Economics for Entrepreneurs websites, and we'll repost it with this episode. Mark's research is continuous, and he's back today to both share more details and to give a flavor of a couple of the tools he's able to provide to help entrepreneurs implement the process. As you all know, a process map with proven tools is a solid route to control outcomes and reduce risk. And we're excited to share that Mark's in the process of finalizing a complete online course on the value learning process, complete with a full suite of downloadable tools for every process step. We hope to release this new course in the first half of 2020. This is all part of our ongoing efforts at Economics for Entrepreneurs and Mises for Business to provide a community of entrepreneurs with knowledge and resources for better business results. Mark, welcome back to Economics for Entrepreneurs.
Hey, Hunter, it's good to be back.
Well, thank you. Last time you were here, you introduced us to your breakthrough insight for entrepreneurs that value is an experience for customers. It's not a dollars and cents calculation. And that experience can be viewed as a process. And you specifically called it a learning process. And it's a process that the entrepreneur can engage in, can facilitate, can help the customer enhance their experience. And so the entrepreneur becomes a partner in the experience. And you hinted at some tools that we can provide to entrepreneurs to help them. But first, let's review the learning process that the customers go through in the value experience, and then we'll talk about the tools.
Sure. Yeah. So last time we talked about kind of the customer learning experience cycle, and you guys put together that nice little 5-point process loop, which was pretty nice. So just real quick, to review that, the customers are learning intentionally over time. They're endlessly looking for new and better ways to satisfy their needs. Kind of the way that life works for us is we're endlessly looking for better satisfaction. We're trying to make our lives as good as it can possibly be. And that's the intentionality that underlies life experience. And so yeah, we're constantly trying to become increasingly satisfied. And that means that we're attentive to our experiences and trying to understand them and learn from them.
Well, when you say intentionally, Mark, is that conscious? Like I feel like I'm always trying to do that, or is it subconscious or semi-conscious? How do they think about it?
Yeah. Honestly, there's some debate going on in philosophy about this. What we mean is basically the directedness of in philosophy. We mean the directedness of our aims, our attention, our purposes, and in our actions. So it does, in my view at least, it goes from the conscious all the way down to the subconscious. But when we get down to the unconscious level, that gets a little sticky. We don't know much about that. But anyway, intentionality doesn't always mean that we're actively doing something. Much of our intentionality is passive. Directing our conscious awareness and learning. And so Mises explained that everything we do is intentional. And that includes stuff that we often don't think is intentional, like resting and even learning. So this learning cycle that we talked about last time is an intentional cycle. We're trying to figure out what is most valuable for us. And so the 5 stages that we talked about in that cycle include, I think the first one was predicted value. And so that's an imagination-based step. The consumer basically imagines what a satisfaction would feel like and how much better off they'd be as a result. In my subjective value theory, I'm defining value as the total benefit experienced. So in these terms, predicted value is the expected benefit, which is imagined and anticipated.
One of the interesting things you said last time, I think, Mark, was that it's the nature of being human that we can create these counterfactuals, I think you call them, in your mind. You can imagine this future benefit without it having taken place. You can construct a model of it, and that's a fascinating insight into how the mind thinks about value.
Yeah, you can actually experience that value to some extent before you actually really experience it, right? You can experience it in your mind, and that you can derive some value from that, right? Your anticipation of eating that steak dinner kind of makes your mouth water already, which is pretty interesting. Anyway, the second stage in that process was what we called relative value. And basically that stage just reminds us that every valued good has an opportunity cost, right? So what are we giving up to have this consumption experience, that satisfaction? So we got to compare our value experiences, our possible value experiences. Then the third stage is exchange value. When we account for the expected value and the opportunity cost, how much are we willing to actually pay for that experienced benefit that we expect? So the relative valuation process helps with that. So we often use other similar products to kind of help frame what we think that satisfaction should cost, or what we should be willing to pay, the price we should be willing to pay for something. So that can be kind of a deliberate process involving comparing options and prices, right? So sometimes we'll look at all the different options on Amazon or something like that and try to gauge a price that we should be willing to pay on that way. But sometimes we can be spontaneous and just, whatever we see something that we want, we're just like, whatever, I'm going to buy it. Or, the salesman's pushy or something like that, and we just kind of relent.
And then also, I think you said that one of the options the entrepreneur always has to think about, that the customer has in their mind, is do nothing, don't buy. One of the things that the customer can do is say, I'll postpone this purchase, or I'm just not going to make it at all. I don't need it. That's an option. That's one of the opportunity cost options. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. And that would probably be placed in the relative value stage, right? Okay. So one option, one of those opportunity costs is the status quo. Mm-hmm. So sometimes what we've got already is good enough.
Yep. Good. That's helpful.
Yep. The fourth stage is to actually experience the value. So that's the actual consumption process. So again, value is experienced benefit, so that this value actually becomes reality only when and while we consume the product. So if you remember from that last time, there's the two sides to that process: the physical side and the conscious experience of it. The physical benefit and the conscious experienced benefit.
Yeah. And didn't we say also that the conscious side can be time shifted? To continue the steak analogy, I can be enjoying the mouth-watering goodness of the steak as I slice it and chew it, but I might experience some of the value afterwards when I sit back and say, that was terrific, or I describe it the next day. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So that gets into kind of phenomenological meta theory and philosophy of experience, which is pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, the duration of the experience is subjective, really. There's not an objective start and end. It's more of kind of a flow and a kind of continuous process. So yeah, and that process in our minds, at least our conscious experience, can go on for a while after the actual food has been eaten, so to speak.
Okay.
And then the last stage is the value assessment stage, and that is based only on our conscious experience, what we are aware of in that consumption experience. So here we reassess what our predicted value was and determine how accurate that prediction really was. So we're comparing our conscious experience to that imagined experience and trying to see if there was a discrepancy. And if there was, then we've learned something, right? There's a surprise, there's something different than we had known before, and we can learn from that. Otherwise, if our expectations were perfectly met, then we would say that's a satisfactory experience, but we don't learn much from it. And then if our experience was much worse than we imagined it was going to be, then that's a dissatisfactory experience, and that also produces a lot of new information for future consideration. And then the cycle repeats, and we form from that new knowledge, if there is any, new predictive valuations for future experiences.
Is it true to say that there are lots, an uncountable number of these value learning cycles going on in the consumer's head at any one period of time?
Yeah, honestly, we're constantly experiencing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we're always consuming. Literally, we're obviously not always aware of those consumption processes, right? We're consuming right now chairs, cars, the radio or podcast, whatever we're listening to. So it's always that process ongoing, but we're not always necessarily learning from it if we're not aware, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more in just a bit.
Okay. Well, good. That's a great summary. And as you mentioned, we created a PDF that visually illustrates that cycle. It's with episode 44, and I'll make a link to it on the show notes for this episode as well, so people have it. Just to balance the idea of the customer's learning process, I think you said that the entrepreneur is learning all the time too. They're going through a value learning process. They're learning from their customers and learning what they're experiencing, right?
Yeah, right. So, the cycle we talked about, that learning cycle is a demand side cycle. It's a consumer process. But entrepreneurs can learn through that cycle themselves, right? Because entrepreneurs are consumers themselves, right? We're all consumers. Right. So they can learn as consumers, or, if they are not the consumer of their own product, then they would have to learn indirectly from other consumers who are experiencing that cycle. And that process is a bit of a different process, and it's more challenging. And that's what some of the tools that we're going to talk about today are meant to help us kind of learn and do well. But of course, the first step is to understand how those consumers came to understand their valuations, what they expect in terms of their predicted valuations in the first place.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Packard giving a preview of two important components of his economic research on the customer value learning process. They're designed to give business owners two things: the right framework to process key insights from his economic research, and real-time implementation tools so that you can establish a business advantage. If you're interested in being one of the first business owners to receive and put Dr. Packard's tools to use, sign up for the waiting list at e4epod.com/55. That's the letter E, the number 4, letter E, pod.com/55. Now back to our conversation. Well, let's dive into that slightly deeper level that you've hinted at, Mark. So we're not sure how much of this is conscious and subconscious and unconscious, but the customer's not making notes while they're consuming or compiling a checklist of what was good or what was bad and so on. So we've got to delve a little bit. Can you talk about that and the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, so I think last time we talked a little bit about the philosophy of representationalism, how experience is actually a mental representation of that our minds create from the sense stimuli that our senses pick up. So our brains are really magnificent organisms. They're incredible at what they can do, but they're not unlimited. So we have to actually focus our limited capacity, our attention, on what is most relevant to our intentions at any moment. We don't have the capacity to focus on everything out there. We have to kind of pick and choose what we're going to focus our limited capacity on. And so in behavioral economics, they miss this point quite a bit. They see these limitations as cognitive mistakes that cause illusions and irrational biases. But there's some pretty interesting new research by Jan Koenderink and Teppo Felin and some others that are arguing that these aren't really biases, but these are efficient uses of our limited cognitive capacity, given what we ask our brains to do. I guess the point is that we're because we're not able to pay attention to everything we're experiencing at any one time. We've got to be intentional about it, right? So think about it. So right now, what are you experiencing?
I'm talking to you, and I'm thinking about the conversation we're having.
Okay, but there's also some other things you're experiencing too, right? Are you sitting in a chair, for example?
I am.
Are you inside?
I'm inside. I'm staring out of my window, though, where I've got a pretty lawn with flowers and so on.
Okay, so you got a nice view, and you're probably in some conditioned temperatures and stuff like that.
I'm in San Diego, where it's a little cooler than it normally is, but I'm experiencing a good February day.
Yeah, so you probably didn't realize you were consuming, and the listeners to the podcast right now are experiencing probably other things. You didn't realize you were consuming most of those other things until I drew your attention to them.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So your mind is focused on its most consequential experience at the moment, which I hope is this podcast.
Is our conversation. Yeah. Yes.
And you're basically ignoring all the other things you're experiencing. But because you're not consciously aware of those experiences, you're not really learning anything from them. But think about what that means for entrepreneurs trying to learn from their customers. In many cases, or at many times, a lot of our customers are probably not even paying attention to the experience that you're creating for them. Or if you're trying to learn about a particular need for your innovation process, they might not have learned much about it yet, just because of the distractedness of consciousness. So you can't necessarily just ask any customer what their needs are. The average customer probably doesn't know, or at least they probably don't know enough. They haven't gone deep enough to the extent that they're of much use to us. So they're mostly just going about their days, not paying much heed to those needs, using whatever products they've always used, or to keep their needs as satisfied as they know.
So I think I understand that, but we always talk about an infinite resource that entrepreneurs have, and that's the customer's feeling of dissatisfaction, by which we mean that the customer's always thinking things could be better. And maybe, as you say, they're not thinking specifically about a type of consumption that they're going through or any other product or service, but when things are dissatisfying to them, that creates an opportunity for the entrepreneur. Maybe they're paying extra attention. Is that accurate?
Yeah, our minds have an interesting mechanism that lets us shift attention to different experiences that are more important to our attentions and well-being, which over time keep changing, right? Just for example, if someone throws a fist unexpectedly towards your face, what do?
Recoil, I think.
Yeah, you're gonna flinch, right? So what's happening there? Well, your non-focal perception observes an impending threat, this fist coming at you, and it draws your attention away from what you were previously focused on and towards the fist. And at the same time, it instigates a protective reaction. You actually instinctively move away. So your attention can get drawn away by things that the subconscious perceives and deems more important to be actively thinking about, like an impending danger. Or it can drift to distractions if your mind loses interest in what it was previously on, right? If you're in a boring speech or something, your mind might kind of think, oh, this isn't all that important to me. And so it starts thinking of other things that it thinks more valuable at the time or something like that. But in other words, our conscious attention is shifting from value to value, I guess, or what it thinks at any moment is most important at the time to be thinking about. So let's apply that now to your customer or your prospective customer.
So just let me understand there, Mark. So this non-focal attention is kind of always running in the background or at the side, and then sometimes we can call it up when the fist appears in our face. We call it up.
Yeah, more or less. So again, our consciousness is limited, so it's always pointed at whatever is the most important to us at that moment. And while something is important to us, because we're actively working towards something, sometimes the mind will shift away from that because it sees something that may be even more important at the moment. And then once that is resolved, then we can shift back to whatever was previously more important.
Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted your flow. Keep going.
No, that was good. So back to the customer or your prospective customer. Which customer is going to know the most about the experience you are interested in terms of solving it? And this is the key question. So many market researchers learn from customers that just don't really know very much. So what they end up learning is typically not much, or worse, they might even learn things that are wrong, which is actually pretty common. So I'm going to give you two answers to this question. The question of which customers know the most for you. And the first answer is it's the customer that pays the most attention to it. That's pretty intuitive, right? Customers that experience the need you're interested in the background of their minds are not the ones you want to learn from. You want to learn from the customer that is attentively consuming your product, that is kind of they're not distracted as they are consuming it. They're focused on that experience. And those are going to be the customers typically who need it the most. The need is going to be highly interesting to them, and so will command their attention. But you should be aware, though, that even high need consumers may experience the need and satisfactions that you're interested in times that are inconveniently that coincide with other high need experiences that are with other distractions. So their attention might be divided or drawn away to other things. So even those high needs consumers can sometimes be low knowledge because they are distracted.
Yeah. But you're saying something pretty profound, I think, about market research, which is that the standard mathematical and technical kinds of quantitative approaches about samples and statistical significance and balance and all of those kinds of things are not what you should be looking for. It's this customer who's paying the most attention to the problem you're trying to address. That's the one to look for.
Well, yeah, you're looking for high knowledge consumers, and
okay.
most market research doesn't distinguish consumers. They kind of assume that all consumers know what they want, and that's not necessarily the case. So my second answer to that question about who knows the most, and probably the better answer to this question, and what we should really focus on, because they have the most to learn from, is customers that are most dissatisfied from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is kind of what you were just saying, right? So the reason why is because dissatisfaction is one of those disconfirmatory experiences, right? So we expected a particular level of satisfaction in that learning cycle, and it was disconfirmed. Our experience didn't match that up. So it's a high learning experience, and that's there's a few reasons why these types of customers are really good to talk to. And the first one is, well, they are highly motivated to talk to you. They want to talk to you and tell you why they're not happy, because you're trying to solve their problem in a better way. So if you can solve their need, they're better off. So they are motivated to tell you as much as they can. So they are going to be more willing to share more and better information. And then secondly, back to what I was just saying, because it's unexpected, that dissatisfactory experience does draw their attention to that experience, right? So, remember the example of the fist coming to your face. Those things that draw your attention to them, dissatisfaction is one of those, right? We pay attention to the dissatisfaction because it's unexpected and there's something to learn from it. So when we are discomforted, when we have something that's wrong, our mind gets attracted to it and focuses on it. So those dissatisfactory experiences tend to be paid more attention to.
Let me just give you a quick reminder that you can put your name on a waiting list for a complete course on the customer value learning process conducted by Dr. Packard, with a complete set of high-utility downloadable tools at e4epod.com/55. That's the letter E, the number 4, letter E, pod.com/55. In the meantime, check out our Austrian Entrepreneur's Journey course, which is ready now, with a full set of Austrian economics-inspired processes and tools at e4epod.com/journey. e4epod.com/journey. Now back to our conversation. Well, so let me just ask one question there, Mark. You used the term high learning event, and I understand that they're highly knowledgeable customers. They're highly motivated. Does high learning mean they pay more attention to detail? They can tell you more accurately what it is the problem. They can give you more information than perhaps other people could. Just say a little bit more about high learning. What does it do for the customer to go through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So think about your typical satisfactory experience. Like, you went to a fast food place that you like and you order your favorite hamburger and it was good. What do you learn from that?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is probably nothing, or at least not very much, right? These types of satisfactory experiences, it was fine types of experiences, fall within what marketing research calls the zone of indifference.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a memorable experience. You don't learn from these experiences. What you learn are from the surprising experiences. So these can be positive surprises, what some marketing research calls delights, or more commonly from negative surprises, right? The dissatisfactions. So we can learn from both of these types of experiences, but compare what you learn from delight versus dissatisfaction real quick. What do you learn from delight? Well, you learn that you like the product and that it's something you would probably prefer now to satisfy your particular need because you were surprised at how valuable it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was even better than you expected, and you were willing to pay in the first place for it. So certainly helpful. It updates your learning, your mental map of what's valuable. But what you've learned is this is what I like for this satisfaction. But you don't learn much about your need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So if I like something, I can say, check, I'll go back and do it again. If I don't, I've got to examine, well, what is it that disappointed me? How does that relate to my needs? I've got to think about it more deeply. I think that's what you're telling me.
Right. So the dissatisfactory experiences push you to kind of really try to understand what the need really is and what the mechanism is. Because basically what you've learned is my previous understanding of this need and what should satisfy it was wrong. And so I've learned a new kind of new information about this need. And so I have to change kind of what I thought I understood about this need. And so these dissatisfied customers end up learning at least closer to what their real needs are. And so those are the ones that are really high learning and high knowledge. There's a good quote from Bill Gates. And so he says, unhappy customers are always a concern. They're also your greatest opportunity. Listening and learning rather than being defensive can make customer complaints your best source of significant quality improvements. So yeah, I like that. So yeah, your dissatisfied customers, whether they're your own customers or someone else's, are who you really want to listen to.
Yeah, you put it in terrific context for us. Dissatisfied sounds like a problem, but they're high knowledge customers. They're high learning, so they've got more to share. And you said, I think also they're highly motivated to share that information with a researcher or anybody else that they're going to be talking to. Good. Okay. Well, let's move on to tools and how we can focus those customers, if we can find them, on what we're interviewing them for, what we're probing them for, the information that we want to learn about their experience. Let's talk about tools.
Okay. So yeah, based on this kind of background understanding of who to talk to and what we can get from them, I developed two tools for entrepreneurs to use to get our entrepreneurs to a much better understanding of what those customers really need. So the first one is a tool to help entrepreneurs pick the right customers to talk to find those high knowledge ones. And second, I've got a tool that I worked on to help talk to those customers in a way that'll get deep into their experiences so you can really dig down into what the experience is really like.
Okay, let's do the finding the right customers tool first.
Okay, so most business schools will teach you to do market research when you're starting a business, and they're right, sort of. The thing is, like I said earlier, most marketing research is bad, right? It's misleading because you're talking to people that are in the middle stages of a lifelong learning process, and most of them just haven't figured it out yet. In fact, really no one has it perfectly figured out. We're all in that learning process, that cycle about learning about our needs. And so what we want are customers that are further along in that process, that have gone through that cycle more often, more times than our average customer with respect to that particular need that we're trying to solve. So what you want to do is find customers that have been, like I said, those high knowledge customers that were dissatisfied most often, because they're going to be the ones that are that probably know the most about their needs. So how do you find them? Well, I'm not going to go into the details on the tool because we're going to save that as part, because that's part of the curriculum that we're putting together for the Mises for Business online curriculum.
Right.
Yeah. What's the website for that again?
Right now, it's Mises.business at LinkedIn. You can keep up to date with everything that we're doing and all the latest information. And then at Mises.org/E4EPod, we've got all of the process maps like the one that you built for the value learning experience. We've got them collated and searchable there. But we're building a new website, and you're going to be the first major knowledge course that we put on the website, Mark. So we're giving people a titillating preview here.
Oh, cool. Okay, so perfect. But let me give you quick, really the gist of what this first tool does and
Yeah, please.
and why. So what the tool is basically trying to help us look for is what Eric von Hippel has called lead users. So lead users are the very high needs customers that are always at the cutting edge of a technology because every new innovation means a possible step toward greater satisfaction of their need, which they are extremely sensitive to, right? So these are the most impacted by new products, and so they're typically the first to try them. And they're also generally the most dissatisfied with current options. So they tend to be customers that have the best understanding of what they really need. So the research on these lead users, which is pretty large at this point, basically shows pretty convincingly that lead users end up becoming the best entrepreneurs themselves. They tend to have the best innovations because they understand the market's needs the best.
Yep. One of the examples I always think about, Mark, is what's going on in the food industry, especially with clean food and more nutritious food. And I'm thinking now about the low sugar movement that's going on. So people are always trying to find out, how can I do better at getting sugar out of my diet? How can I get foods that are really palatable with less sugar? And like you said, they're big ingredients label readers. They search through the shelves in the supermarket. They tell each other about new discoveries that they've made. Maybe they try new recipes at home that makes them kind of entrepreneurs themselves. It's a great example. And the food industry has changed dramatically in just the last few years because of those, quote, lead users, unquote.
Yeah, that's right. The people pay attention to lead users, and so they are the most important to get on board with your idea, your solution, because they are who the rest of the market is waiting for and listening to.
Good. Let's find them. How do we find them?
Yeah. So that's what this first tool is all about, right? It gives you a nice step-by-step process for tracking down lead users to talk to. So, it's not necessarily an easy process. Lead users aren't really necessarily easy to find. You're going to have to embed yourself into the user communities in order to actually find them. But like I said earlier, they're likely to be very willing to talk to you because they are trying to solve their problem better, and your intention is to help them with that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess the big point I wanted to make is that this tool and the research it's based on it's cutting edge, right? Most entrepreneurs barely even talk to their prospective customers, and when they do, they're often getting misled by talking to the wrong customers who don't really know what they're talking about, right? You probably know the famous quote from Steve Jobs that most customers don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? He's absolutely right? People will can tell you what they want at any moment, but they can't tell you what they really want, what they really need is probably a better way to say that, because they're learning about that. They're in that learning cycle. So how do you figure out what they really want, what they should want? Well, you have to find those exceptional customers, those lead users who really know more about their needs than the average person, and they will help kind of point you in that right direction. So if you can successfully apply this tool to find the right customers to talk to, the ones who know most about their needs and how to satisfy them, you'll be at a huge advantage.
I remember the implementation of that Jobs example too, which was people would say, there's problems with the keyboard. I need an easier to use keyboard. I need bigger buttons or something like that. And his solution was no keyboard. It was the touch screen. And so the consumers couldn't have told him that, but they can tell him what was wrong with the status quo, as you call it.
Right. So Clayton Christensen talked about that called it the innovator's dilemma, right? If you listen too much to what customers want and do just what they want, you're missing what they really need and should want. And you can fall behind if you do that. So
just to be clear, Mark, is when we're screening for these customers, is high need a different screen than high dissatisfaction, or are they one and the same thing?
Well, they'll often be the same person, but not always. So some consumers are just perpetually dissatisfied, and these types don't often bother to learn from their dissatisfaction. We could call them complainers or something like that. So they could be picky or particular about their preferences, even though they have no good reason based on the actual underlying need, just to be so picky. So those types aren't super helpful to talk to, at least in the early stages. But you're right; they could be good gauges of successful satisfaction later on once you've got a prototype already developed. But your ultimate goal is to satisfy the pickiest of customers. So they can be good to talk to, but still, it's the lead users in particular that you want to focus on in the early stages, and really, in fact, most of the time, and not on those complainers type of dissatisfied customers. So the tool that we've developed should help you get to those lead users and not necessarily the complainers.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears to the other tool. Let's say I can find these high need, high dissatisfaction lead users. Help me talk to them effectively.
Okay. Yeah. So the second tool is premised on a kind of a growing literature on what's called mindfulness. And mindfulness refers to paying attention to the present moment and experiencing the now to its fullest extent. The basis of the idea is, again, the limitations of our conscious minds and how we can only pay limited attention to our experiences. In fact, like you said earlier, our minds are not only keeping tabs on current experiences, but they're also having to keep up with it, what is coming up in the future and what we should be doing as time passes. Our minds remember past events. It's deductively reasoning as we try to understand and figure things out and learn from them. And then again, it imagines possibilities and futures from which we make our judgments over what to do next. And so, yeah, like I said before, our minds are brilliant. They're incredible and super powerful. But anyway, if we're going to get our customers to maximize their learning from their experience and to help us really dig into that real experience, we want them in full experiential mode. We want their consciousness fully engaged in that experience that we're interested in, ignoring all those other distractions and focusing on that specific experience so that we can really come to understand and kind of piece together what's really going on. So, most mindfulness techniques today are designed to help you meditate and relax and stuff like that, trying to help you become aware of your entire self and its experience. Some of that can get, spiritual and we're not really interested in that kind of stuff here, but we can adapt those techniques at least to our practical purposes for entrepreneurship, right? What we want to get is to get the customers to learn from that experience fully, to get them in a mindset of fully engaging that experience in a way that they can come to at least narrate what's going on for them in a way that we can learn the most from. And remember, if we followed the first tool, what we should have for this tool is those high needs consumers that should already have a better understanding of what's going on in their needs already. So that's what this tool teaches you. It's a step-by-step instruction for talking those high needs customers through a mindfulness technique to get the best information and understanding of that experience and their needs as possible.
Just give us one more hint. Are we helping them to reconstruct and evaluate a previous experience that they've had, or are we doing it in real time while they're experiencing?
Yeah, we're putting them into that experience that we want to learn about, right? If that's not practical or even possible, then yeah, you can do it through a kind of a memory type of mindfulness technique. But ideally, what you want to do is kind of get them into that situation that they're experiencing that need, and satisfying it. They're consuming the product that they now use to satisfy that need, and you're helping them kind of pay close attention to what's going on in their experience as they do so, and having them narrate it to you so that you can kind of follow along, if you will.
And when in the entrepreneurial process is the entrepreneur using this tool, Mark? We've talked about getting the customer involved as early as possible in the value learning process.
Right.
When can I use it?
Yeah. So yeah, I get, like you said, it's most important at the initial stages of idea development, because you're trying to understand that need before you devise the solution to it. Right. We don't want to start with a solution and spend a lot of our time and effort and money devising and prototyping that and taking it to early stage feedback levels, only to learn that we didn't even understand what we were trying to solve. So that it's most important at those initial stages, but you're going to need to be continuously learning about your customers' experiences. So you're going to want to keep going back to these tools over and over again over time. For example, let's say that you use these tools and figure out what's wrong with current products on the market and create a new product that's much better, and you take it to market and you're a smash success. Great. How long is that success going to last?
Mm-hmm.
If you're successful, you're going to have competition really soon. So now what? Well, maybe you can sustain your success because of your first mover advantage and your reputation, but research suggests now that it's getting harder and harder to keep a competitive advantage over time. So you're probably going to need to go back to your lead users again to find out what is their experience really like now with your product and what's missing from it, what's wrong with it, what can be improved. And this will help, keep advancing the ball over time, right? The answer may be incremental improvements over time, which should at least keep you ahead of the competition. But I'd encourage successful entrepreneurs, to not get their mind pigeonholed into the specific way it's always been done. Look at the problem to solve, and not the solution that you've already come up with or that already exists, and try to think of how to solve that problem if you were to start all over again from scratch, right? I think when you talked to Bob Luddy really early on in this podcast, mm-hmm. he mentioned how he did that, right? I don't know if you remember that story.
Yeah.
About how he basically went to his engineers and said, okay, if we were going to start from scratch, what materials would we use for these commercial ovens? And they're like, we'd actually use this one. It's cheaper and it's better. And they're like, well, let's do that instead of doing it this old way that was worse.
Right.
And it made them smash success, right? So if you want to stay ahead, you're going to need to become a consumer savant, right? Never think you've got it figured out. Remember, we're always learning. We've never got ourselves fully figured out. So it's an endless learning process. So as an entrepreneur, you got to follow consumers on this endless process. You got to keep it going.
So you've just thrown another term at us there, which sounds very useful, but maybe you can explain it just a little bit, is consumer savant. How do I develop the skill set to do that?
Oh, yeah. So consumer savant, I don't know, it's not a technical term, I guess, but a consumer savant would be someone who knows what consumers truly need, not just what they want. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's easy to ask consumers what they want, and they can tell you just as easily, but marketing research suggests that consumers are actually very bad at predicting what they'll want in the future. If you're listening to what consumers want, you're building your business on old information. By the time you get your business off the ground, consumer preferences have probably already changed and they won't want it anymore. So don't build your business on what they tell you they want. As Steve Jobs said again, you show them what to want. Otherwise, you'll always be a step behind. But to do that, you need to understand consumers at a much deeper level, right? You have to understand their real needs.
Yeah. Another way to say that, I think, and we can talk about this another time, is the job of the entrepreneur is to own the problem, not the solution. So constantly be examining that problem, understanding the problem, watching it evolve, and so on. Well, I'm going to cut us off for reasons of time, Mark.
Okay.
You've taken us through two tools, the high need, high knowledge customers tool. So that's going to help us ensure that the entrepreneur is taking data from the customers who are most likely to be helpful and hopefully to be future buyers. So it's selecting the right customers to talk to. And then the mindfulness tool focus those customers on their experiences and dissatisfactions and draws out all the details and gets them so deeply focused that they can be more useful than than would ordinarily be the case.
Yep.
So we're going to package those up, but perhaps you can tie it up in a bow for us and summarize the benefits here.
Yeah. So, I mean, that consumer savant that we just talked about, I guess the point is that a consumer savant is not an innate quality that some have and others don't. It's not a personality or something like that. It can be learned, and you can become one, but you need to talk to the right consumers, and you need to talk to them in a way that gets down to the core experience, the actual need and dissatisfaction. And when you do that, you can really, and when you really understand what consumers want, you'll be at a huge advantage. So these tools should help entrepreneurs get there.
Good. Well, thank you, Mark. And I know that you're packaging up this whole course for us, and I apologize if we're teasing a little bit to people who are listening, but we can promise that it will be substantially valuable with these tools and more, and all of your research. So we appreciate that, and we look forward to the time you can come back and give us more access. Maybe we'll do one more of these before we launch the course, and we can preview some more value for our listeners. So, Mark, thank you very much.
Sounds great. Thanks, Hunter.
Economics for Entrepreneurs is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. That's MISES.org. For more from Hunter Hastings, check out hunterhastings.com.